We want to make sure the resources are also available for folks to take advantage of so that they can invest in the resources that they need, whether it's assessments or tools, to strengthen their cybersecurity. So that at a very high level is kind of the way that we think about cybersecurity for critical infrastructure sectors. And water and wastewater is so important that we have made it a priority sector for regulatory action and grant funding.
Thank you so much. Sorry. John, you're at Texas Cyber Command. Can you tell us a little bit about what a Cyber Command model lets you do operationally, especially for utilities, including some that have no security staff at all? So kind of what does the Cyber Command do? And you can give us a bit of your background as well as we dive in.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Can you all hear me? Or do I need to lean in closer? John Keefe, the Chief Strategy Officer for Texas Cyber Command, as Mike indicated. Just a little by way of background, I had 24 years of federal service before I retired last year. The agency I identify most closely with, I did 15 years there, was the National Security Agency. I was in tailored access operations, where I was the senior strategist. I was a senior strategist for General Paul Nakasone. I did 2 years at the White House as a senior director for cyber policy at the NSC. So you might say, like, John, well, how the heck did you wind up in San Antonio? Well, part of the answer is that the chief that was appointed by the governor at Texas Cyber Command is Vice Admiral T.J. White. I worked for TJ when he was the military deputy in tailored access operations. The other thing I did was I read the legislation that created Texas Cyber Command. You can Google it, Texas Government Code 2063, homework assignment. When I read, I'm a former Hill staffer as well. I worked for the House Intelligence Committee right after 9/11 and leading up to the Iraq WMD debacle. So I'm genetically programmed to look at legislation and go, like, just, and I read this legislation and I was like, I don't know what the story is, but somebody in Texas knew what they were doing when they wrote this legislation. And then the governor backed it. So these are like the two key ingredients. The legislature wanted it, and then the governor backed it. In fact, he is championing it. When the two, I'll just mention the two folks from the legislature that are identified as the champions of this legislation, Senator Tan Parker and Representative Giovanni Capriglione. Josh said it earlier, Texas recognized that cavalry is not coming to the rescue. And so the story of this legislation is about 6 years in the making, but last year and probably early in 2024 was when it really got accelerated, where Texas, the talking point is always 8th largest economy in the world, 33 million people. Texas decided, hey, we need to take control of our own destiny and try to do what we can to protect ourselves in cyberspace. So the legislation was signed by the governor in June of 2025, went into effect in September 1st of 2025. So this Texas Cyber Command is quite a new agency. By the way, when I hear Texas Cyber Command, I was like, Texas is going to do offensive cyber operations? Because I worked at NSA for 15 years. I'm used to working with U.S. Cyber Command.
That's why I had these questions for you, actually. I wanted you to tell us all the secrets. Yeah,
I had the offensive cyber portfolio at the NSC. I was like, what are they talking about in Texas? As it turns out, that what Texas Cyber Command is functionally CISA for the state of Texas. TJ was appointed by the governor in mid-September of 2025, and the command was activated 1 March 2026. And it was created by cleaving off part of the Department of Information Resources, which is the IT procurement agency for the state of Texas. And so we inherited a body of people, and then Texas Cyber Command itself is now starting to hire folks. So it is a strange experience to be a former federal now working as a Texas state employee. Initial operational capability was really this week, June 14th. So the FIFA World Cup, there are 2 locations in Texas, 2 stadiums that are hosting World Cup matches. And so there's a whole emergency management apparatus that has been activated to support FIFA. Texas Cyber Command is actually one of those entities that's been activated. The mission of Texas Cyber Command: prevent and respond to cybersecurity incidents that affect government entities and critical infrastructure in Texas, which I think is why we got the invite to this event here. And then you'll hear us talk about 6 operational terrains. These are the things so Texas Cyber Command at its core is really sort of an operational entity. So respond to incidents. This is, nobody wants to be in the response mode if you can avoid it. And so Chief White's thinking is we need to tip the balance way back towards prevent. But it is an operational entity in the sense that it has responsibility for monitoring networks. That is one of the directions that we will have to go in to improve our ability to both monitor networks and respond to incidents, but also to identify where vulnerabilities exist and then start recommending mitigations. I mentioned the 6 operational terrains. The 2 most important ones, the Texas state government itself is 160 odd departments, agencies, commissions, boards, et cetera, that require cybersecurity. And then critical infrastructure, which is in the legislation, it talks about the infrastructure in Texas that is vital to the security, governance, public health, and safety, economy, and morale of the state. And so that we've asked, like, how many entities is that? And that's something on the order of 2,000 to 6,000. And so those are the 2, I think, really heavy lifts, and those will be the defining efforts. Institutions of higher education, so that's the Texas university system, that's terrain number 2. The law enforcement and judiciary, this is the one that scares me, frankly, because my hypothesis is that we're going to find intruders in that set of networks that we didn't expect, think cartels. And that's just John talking. I don't have any particular intel knowledge on that, but
this is why you come to these sessions.
But I have been around for a while. And then there's what we call covered entities, which are private entities operating in critical infrastructure or local governments. And I will say, like, I was on the phone with the IT lead for Caldwell County. I had to look it on the map. I had no idea. I'm learning the Texas. In case you don't know, Texas is a vast state, and I'm learning the geography very fast. But Caldwell County, I talked to the IT lead for the county government, and so I just asked him, like, "Hey, what's the vibe? What are you seeing out there?" And it was a little bit horrifying. I had the ransomware account at the National Security Council, but when he started describing sort of the daily interactions of networks being scanned and probes and phishing emails and things like that, and it just sort of like horrifying in the sense that this is day to day for all these local governments. And they're in the the NSA folks will look at it like, I can very quickly sort out who's going to be targeted by ransomware and who's going to be targeted by the typhoons. And the local governments, hey, they're entities that look like they have to pay because otherwise they wind up shutting down for some period of weeks. And generally the local populations are not, that will put a whole bunch of folks, quote unquote, out of business if those governments are not functioning. And so it did sort of recast it. It gave me a very local flavor for what are the local governments in Texas dealing with. I think I'll end my comments there, but that's just sort of an overview of where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so we'll jump right over to Brigadier General Craig Hunter. And so the State Guard sits in a unique context, including Title 32, which has you in state active duty with a federal mission. When a Maryland water facility is hit, what triggers the Guard's involvement, and what can the Guard bring to bear that maybe a civilian agency can't? And how do you guys approach that work?
Well, first, good morning, and thank you for having me. Make sure this is on. Can everyone hear me okay? First, a brief overview, and I apologize. Management. So go through MDM, and if they go to the state and say, we've gotten to a point where we cannot correct this, is there anything the state can do to assist? Basically, the state will come to us. So the state CISO has me on speed dial. Sometimes either we'll text or they'll come to us and ask, do you guys think you can take a look at this? It's very easy for us first just to go in and look. Okay, we can do that in multiple statuses. So I can send a a person in, one of my cyber experts, which I have full-time that are working for me every day. I have a cyber protection team of 30 soldiers. And then on the Air National Guard side, we have about 400 cyber professionals, but they're not all full-time. So one of my cyber professionals can go out and easily just take a look and see, well, let me see what's going on. Let's talk through the process, see what's happening. But if they want us to actually go hands on keyboard and one of the cyber operators to actually start assisting in that way, we need to switch statuses. We have to be in a state active duty status. That requires the governor's approval. So at that point, the governor has to approve the mission, approve the funding, because the state is now paying for it. And then we would switch statuses, go into a state active duty. Under state active duty, we're basically state employees. So, you know, if we're doing law enforcement operations with Maryland State Police, we are law enforcement officers and working for Maryland State Police. Under this, it's the same thing with state employees, and that way we could go in and assist. And what we bring to bear is a full, we bring full cyber protection teams in that can go do the gamut of you know, checking the network, hunting, all the way up to actually, you know, determining where the actual, okay, it doesn't work. Okay, determining actually where the threat is and, oh, there we go. Determining where the threat is and actually eliminating the threat. So we can do the full gamut in a state active duty status, but it does require, especially if it's on a civilian network, there's of course some legal aspects to that and some things that need to be signed that will allow us to do that. But we do have the capability to do that.
Wonderful, thanks. And to round out the first round, James, can you tell us, you work directly with a lot of the owners and operators that the folks on this panel protect. When a target-rich cyber poor utility gets an offer from the state in terms of assistance, what actually moves the needle versus what is well-meaning support that doesn't tend to make an impact?
Thanks for saving the easy question for me.
I mean, you are on the private sector side, so I figure I'll just toss you the hard one.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you for having me. My name is James Regan. I'm the CEO of a social impact consulting firm called Clutch, based out of California. Before that, I spent a little over 10 years in California state government, most recently over the Government Operations Agency as a deputy secretary. It includes our Department of Technology, our Office of Data and Innovation, California, as well as about a dozen others. So it's fun to bring that state perspective into now the social impact consulting, where it's all hands on deck. We heard a lot this morning about how it's going to take everybody. And it has been an interesting learning experience, having been in a state government environment where cybersecurity was a priority, helping work on the different cybersecurity workforce pipelines, job types, et cetera, as a priority, as well as implementing a variety of AI-related tech solutions in government, including in very high consequence of error environments. And so one of the things that I see happening amongst the work that Clutch does, and also just on the West Coast in general, is more and more public-private partnerships amongst and actually I would say public-private academic partnerships, sort of the trifecta, right, of not only participating together to help with cybersecurity planning, but also with workforce planning. Because as much as I think, at least in California and potentially other local governments jump to invest in the cybersecurity infrastructure itself, which is super important. But then once you do that, it doesn't mean much if you don't have the internal talent and knowledge base to manage it. And so as like a follow-on to that, I would say one of the number one ways that we've seen a lot of impact, sort of back to your question, is that private industry plus public sector, state and local governments and utilities, plus academic support in actually getting in-kind investment dollars and training from some of the top industry leaders. There was in California a large MOU signed in multiple waves between some of the leading AI and cybersecurity companies that we all know and love or hate. And our community college system, which is about 116 campuses, 2 million students a year, and the state government. for the sake of talent pipeline. That to me was one of the more impactful investments I've seen, because when I was on the state side, it would have been really difficult for an industry partner to come up and say, hey, we have this $4 million, $10 million, $20 million we want to invest. But then, there's these little things called procurement rules, and we heard a little bit about that earlier. And so it was really difficult. But by having that sort of trifecta partnership, we've seen it move a lot more than maybe we would think it would, as far as the workforce conversation, which then immediately led to the talent pool internally among state and local governments to actually perform and troubleshoot. The last thing I'll say is seems to be a lot of sentiment and fear amongst the incoming workforce about which career paths are worth investing in and which will be negatively affected by things like artificial intelligence and incoming quantum in a couple of years, right? And so there is this really scary sentiment that cybersecurity careers are going to be taken over by artificial intelligence. I think that might be one of the most dangerous sentiments out there right now, because that means there is a whole generation of incoming workforce who are motivated, brilliant, skilled, who are not going to invest in a cybersecurity career that otherwise would. So I'm interested in talking more with all of you, anyone who's interested, about how we can team up to counteract that.
Awesome. Thank you. So moving into round two, when we get into the interdependencies. So water sits underneath everything. Without it, as we heard earlier, hospitals don't run, and also water doesn't run without power. So if the point of the typhoons is disruption, time to a crisis, the attack surface isn't just one sector, it's also the seams between them. So two questions here. We'll start with one, and then I'll give you the second one, I promise. In your state, who actually owns the cascading failure problem, right? Because this is a challenge that often, at least at the federal level, we also saw was challenging in terms of coordination, right? We have sectoral laws, we have sectoral structures, and sometimes the seams between those sectors are hard to cover. So maybe we'll just start with Michaela and work our way down through the states.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I think the reason why the governor established an office in the office of the governor was to set some accountability, and we are ultimately responsible for the services that reach all New Yorkers. One of the challenges with the cascading effects question is that it covers so many different types of entities and agencies that oversee or regulate them. But we have taken a prioritized risk approach to this problem. So we did water and wastewater regulations this year. Last year, we did hospital regulations, cybersecurity regulations, and these have various requirements, including what it is that they need to do to prevent a particular incident, including resilience measures that might be necessary, but then also reporting. If something happens, they have to let us know, because the state has a number of resources at its disposal to support when there's an incident. We have incident response teams, we have ICS specific teams, and they can't be activated until we know about an incident. So for a lot of locals, they are maybe hesitant, or they don't even know who to call. And a big part of our work is reaching them and building trust with them. One of the other challenges about cascading effects is that you don't know how to allocate resources sometimes. So if it's affecting one particular entity, one water and wastewater utility, for example, but it's having all these downstream effects on other entities, how do you tier and triage what the impacts that you anticipate, and then who gets help? One example that's not cyber specific, but thinking about what Acting Director Anderson mentioned in his keynote, is military installations that are supported by critical infrastructure outside the fence line. We've had a number of conversations with forts and military installations across New York about this question, because even though they might have some resilience, whether that's having a generator on site or something like that, they are typically very dependent on water and wastewater, on hospitals, on other critical infrastructure outside of their control and remit. And when something like a winter storm that affected Texas pretty significantly a few years back affects a pretty wide swath of entities, from hospitals to military installations to everyone else, how do you determine who gets power turned back on first? That triage question is super important. And unless you have tabletop exercises and conversations in advance, you aren't able to be prepared in the moment when there's a crisis. So one of the things that we've been focusing on in the last year is how do we make sure those conversations are happening, and that the local critical infrastructure providers know who is dependent on them and how they think about triaging in the case of an incident.
Thank you. Dive right in, John.
All right. First, who owns the cascading problem? Chief White will say Texas Cyber Command actually owns that problem. So before I dive into the specifics on a cascading problem, let me just go back to a few of my opening remarks. So I mentioned that we're trying to tip the balance towards prevention rather than reactive incident response. Chief White will talk about two core outcomes, by the way. Another homework assignment for everybody here. Texas Cyber Command just recently produced a strategic plan. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about are actually posted on our website. If you Google Texas Cyber Command, go to the publications tab, you'll see our strategic plan. It was submitted to the legislature. Every Texas department and agency has to submit one of these. We had 6 weeks notice rather than a year to prepare ours. But nothing concentrates the mind like a deadline for the legislature. Chief, and you'll see in that plan, Chief White will talk about two big outcomes. One is greater cyber operational readiness. That is the prevention set of actions of making your infrastructure better defended, and then stronger cybersecurity resilience for Texas. So that gets to the question of the cascading problem. Chief White will also make this point where we intend to be very intelligence driven. It's partially a byproduct of, there are a few folks that have joined that have NSA backgrounds. And so the interesting thing to me is when those folks join the Texas state employees who are coming from cybersecurity backgrounds, you get this great synergy. The NSA folks typically don't know anything about Texas procurement rules. They don't know about the organization of the government, but they ask a set of questions and they do look at a problem in a way that the Texas state employees don't, which is we know who the adversary is on the other side of the keyboards. And sometimes we know it all the way down to the level of individuals. And so this gives us an advantage of when we look at the Texas state government or critical infrastructure, who's going to be targeted by whom. So we can look at critical infrastructure and say water, power, telcos, okay, typhoons, we're going to have a private conversation in the back room. All right, a whole bunch of you local governments, okay, ransomware, Texas state agencies. If you're holding Texans' data and you're viewed as sort of a critical functioning entity that the government relies on, okay, that's another ransomware thing. Maybe the typhoons, probably not, or less likely. And so out of that schema comes this ability to prioritize in a way that I find is quite unique. It's not like at NSA, we were good at prioritization, but we had a very clear national strategy mandate and a clear sense of who the foreign adversaries were. In Texas, we're able to prioritize these. The government itself is actually quite large. The critical infrastructure entities are quite large and numerous. And so I think this prioritization winds up as the secret ingredient in how we'll go about this. So the specific question on prioritization of critical infrastructure, we are setting up a critical infrastructure cyber center of excellence. RMC Global is has been named as the lead contractor for this. And the whole point of this is to start looking at what sectors of critical infrastructure in Texas must be addressed quickly and first. And so not surprisingly, power and water there. But we're also able to refine it to who's servicing how many customers, and perhaps more importantly, especially when you start talking about the typhoons, what entities are servicing U.S. military bases in Texas. There's a couple big ones: Fort Bliss, Fort Hood, and Joint Base San Antonio, which is actually a consortium of three preceding bases: Fort Sam Houston, and Lackland and Randolph Air Force bases. And so from that, we get a pretty clear sense of, okay, we can get our list down to about 25 entities that we probably got to go talk to and start figuring out how do we improve their cybersecurity, both the strength of their cyber defenses, and then how do we ensure that they're resilient in the event of an attack.
Yeah, so
When I first came into this position in 2025, the first thing my boss tasked me with was she said, yeah, I want to dig more into our role with defense critical infrastructure within Maryland and start really working on that. So one of the first things we did, we went to the Pentagon and met with the Cyber Warfare Division at the Pentagon. So we talked with them and asked, of course, in Maryland, we have Joint Base Andrews, we have NSA, we have Cybercom, we have Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Fort Detrick, several key areas. So when we met with the Cyber Warfare Division, we asked, what's your priority? What do you see as a threat? And their largest threat was outside the wire, like we've been talking about. It's the companies that feed the military installations. That was what they were worried about the most, because they felt pretty secure inside the wire, but they didn't feel good about outside, as they saw that as a vulnerability. So we said, well, why don't we come together, Cyber Warfare Division, Maryland National Guard, let's start holding workshops where we bring all the sectors together individually. And then that way we can have the private sector, the state government, the federal government, law enforcement, everyone in the room at the same time and start working through this issue. So the first one we ran was in August of 2025, and it was focused on the water, wastewater sector. So we brought everyone together, had several private companies there, had the state government, federal government, FBI, CISA. We really were able to get everyone in the room. And I wanted to end it with a tabletop exercise. And so we brought together everyone in the tabletop exercise. And I wrote the tabletop specifically because I wanted to get to a point. So it was a cyber incident that was in the water sector, and it fed a military facility. And also the cascading, we also had a storm coming through at the same time. So as we're going through the tabletop exercise, and this is Maryland, and I don't know if it's like this in other states. So we got to a point and I said, who's in charge? And Maryland Department of Emergency Management said, well, Department of Information Technology, they're in charge because it's a cyber incident. And IT said, no, it's water. So MDE, your environment, you're in charge right now. And they just went back and forth on who's in charge. And as a military guy, I'm going crazy. I'm like, no, one of you is in the lead. Someone has to step up. Which one is it? And so that made a point that in Maryland, no one was in charge. No one, if we had a cascading effect, no one was in charge of it. So we had the same state senator who had previously in the year before, in 2024, pushed through a water wastewater bill that made it mandatory for those companies within Maryland to report cyber incidents. Before that, it wasn't even mandatory to report cyber incidents. After that bill, she was at the workshop. She was at the TTX. She saw what happened, and she asked us, she said, so no one's in charge? No, ma'am, no one is in charge. I think you should look, if you want to push a bill, look at some other states, what they're doing. So she did that. Just recently it passed. So now we formed the Maryland Critical Infrastructure Council. It is not a 100% solution. It is on the right path. I still don't feel like there's a real strong entity in charge, because I like Texas model or New York's model, where it's you pin the tail on them. That is the person. But we're getting there. So right now, as far as, is there a one overall in charge? No. How would we handle cascading effects? That's what the council now is trying to get to. We met last week for the first time, and my priority was list all the critical infrastructure in the state and prioritize it. And what is the governor's priority? Because I can tell you the federal government probably has a different priority. So how do we mesh those two? And so that's what we're trying to work through and trying to get to that point.
That is beautiful. I couldn't have asked for a better kind of like tie into where I want to go next. One point, I'm guessing this is Katie Fry-Hester,
Yes.
State Senator.
Yes.
So super important, as everyone's thinking about this, to have not just your federal or state civilian agencies there, as well as your National Guard, but also your legislators or whoever the decision maker is, so they can see when these seams don't have a place to deal with them, right? And can actually solve the problem from there. And that's a pretty amazing story. we could go two directions from here. I think I'm going to dig into this one because it feels really rich. And then I'll start with you, James, because I think you'll have some thoughts on this one. Now that we're thinking about triage and we're thinking about racking and stacking all these different things and what's the federal responsibility or federal goal versus a state goal, how do you think about triage in a context of concurrency, right? Because we're used to bucket trucks that can go from one state to another because we're not having issues in those places with power or whatever. But if we're talking about everywhere all the time, all at once, this makes it an even bigger challenge. And I think it's the one level deeper question to the piece around triage, right? Which is like, it's not just triage between a few, it's like everything goes out. How are you thinking about that? Or James, what should we be thinking about?
You get the hard question.
Yeah, thank you so much once again.
I really appreciate this question. Actually, all joking aside, it's a tough one, and I think part of what I would say about triage in two contexts, right? Because you're right, it is everywhere all at once. I don't represent the California State Administration anymore, but there is something similar with the more centralized cybersecurity integration center that includes multiple agencies. Because California state government it's federated, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of distribution of responsibility. And they detect and or defend against about 1 million threats on the California infrastructure a day is the last I heard. I would argue that's probably low. But the point on that is like part one, that coordinated effort that we're hearing from all the states is a great first step that I think a lot of state and local governments aren't doing at all yet. Especially in instances where there is distributed responsibility across a lot of different entities, which is really common. So setting up that, whatever, it could be a council, some body of coordination. It doesn't even have to be formal, right? It doesn't have to be announced or necessarily passed. It can be an informal group because we also see that happening in communities of practice. The second piece on triage, like if something significant, like critical failure were to hit the state's infrastructure, the triage, a lot of times, at least in California and several other states, would be coordinated through whatever the equivalent of Office of the Emergency Services would be, right? In that case, typically the triage starts with like immediate health and safety evacuation, transportation of people to and from locations. Then it would roll to, all right, how do we make sure those people have food and water and shelter, right? And in the affected area, whatever it is. It would roll to critical care. Like, for example, there's sometimes, in different states, like public safety power shutoffs, right? Which you have to take into account instances where people are in their home getting critical care. They have life-saving machines. They need power to those. And so it starts, I would argue, all of that starts with the data management and intelligence gathering that we were hearing about from, some of our experts here. And I think I'm getting played out from the back.
No.
So,
No,
I will say that is a precursor.
Yep.
And a lot of entities don't do that very well right now. So that data management collection and just business intelligence is step one in order to know how do we don't even know where people are necessarily sometimes, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but we need that in order to know how do we move them when something affects a certain geography, affects a certain facility. And so to me, that would be a great place to start for everybody if you haven't already.
I'm going to toss to Josh for a second.
Audio.
Yep.
Oh.
I'm going to disrupt different panels throughout the day. The disruption here is just to make it a little harder because we're all adults and we care about this. One of the states I'm working with said if we have water pipes, water disruptions to hospitals, we can handle 3 for the state. They have 60 hospitals. So we're talking, we can handle 3. We have 60. Part of this is what's the ethical, predetermined, ruthless prioritization of which trauma center gets the help.
I'll repeat Josh's question and also give a little alibi for people because I know as state employees, you may not be able to answer this question exactly. But Josh was saying one state that he's working with, there's a question of ruthless prioritization. If water goes out to hospitals, they have a concurrency capacity for 3, and they have 60 critical care hospitals. So how do you address a situation where you actually can't help everyone, right? Or how do you plan for it? I guess it's a different question. I'm not asking you to sit here and tell me exactly which hospitals, but instead, I mean, I think we heard tabletop exercises are a really key piece of this, but how are you getting to that place?
Oh, it's a good one. Appreciate it, Josh. I would say that there's a point at which some of these cyber disruptions that we're talking about start to bleed into other kinds of disruptions that we generally have an understanding of and know how to deal with. So when I think what happens in that moment, I think, what are our diversion plans that we already have established for these hospitals? Those are always in place. And whether it's because there's a mass casualty event, or because there's a big storm, or because there's a parade, go Knicks, that's happening later this week. Whatever the disruption might be that might put undue stress and pressure on any particular hospital, our Department of Health does a very good job of preparing for those types of incidents and being reactive to them. So I do have confidence in our hospital system and our Department of Health that they plan for some of those eventualities. That being said, I don't think they are often thinking about when multiple things are happening at once. So if you are dealing with power issues over here and a data breach over there, and maybe a mass casualty event somewhere else, what do you do when all of those are happening at the same time? Those are the types of scenarios that we do exercise, that we do tabletops on. And we try to think through, okay, if we are having multiple things happening at once, what are the things that we can control? If we can't control some of those things, are elements of a cybersecurity incident things that we can control to some extent? Either minimize the fallout. So make sure that systems are generally segmented so that if one piece goes down, it does not affect other pieces. We think about this a lot on the water and wastewater side too, where our regulations have an exemption clause for physically and logically separated OT systems. So we're trying to incentivize entities to say, okay, if you are physically and logically separating your systems, then you don't necessarily have to abide by the cybersecurity baselines that we have established. However, if you are connecting everything under the sun, we do want you to take these baseline measures. That's one of the ways that we're trying to think about incentivizing preparation for these things and controlling what we can control.
That's a really great policy answer to that piece. I think providing the incentive to push on that is really brilliant. Well done.
So I'd answer this in the following way. One, for a cybersecurity agency in the state government, building up your body of knowledge of where are the interdependencies, that is a non-trivial task. In the case of Texas, I'm not sure that the predecessor agency actually had that body of knowledge. They had a good sense of what the IT network configurations were, but they didn't necessarily know interdependencies. Second, information flow and prioritization. So in the moment, knowing where incidents are occurring and then being able to prioritize. And again, prioritize, I think, is a function of your body of knowledge. If you have a sense of how different networks are connected, or what is your dependency for, what is a particular water provider, who's in that district and who are they servicing, gives you a sense of where you may have to triage and in what way. I love the idea of TTXs. We actually just did the first TTX for Texas Cyber Command last week, and that was a preparation for the FIFA World Cup element. And then the other thing that I always think of is that Texas Cyber Command itself is 50 people currently, and building to a massive force of 122. And even in our wildest imagination, like 180. But there's 160 departments and agencies in the Texas state government. That there's 160 CISOs. There's your army already. And so the idea of drawing on existing state resources, as well as the private sector. So San Antonio, one of the reasons Texas Cyber Command is in San Antonio is because you have the concentration of NSA and 16th Air Force, and a whole bunch of private sector cybersecurity companies. And so I think Texas has already indicated, Chief White talks about operational maneuver is actually one of the elements of operational maneuver for Texas Cyber Command is its procurements. And so we're already laying down the markers for and the processes for us to be able to do procurements with the private sector in Texas in a rapid fashion. And so that's part of my answer. At the end of the day, up against an adversary nation state, now you're into pretty dire circumstances for the nation when you're talking about this set of cascading problems. But anyway, in some sense, that the problem is not fully solvable.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're doing in Maryland, and I highly recommend, is lean on your universities and colleges within your state. So just yesterday, I was at Johns Hopkins Applied Research Laboratory, meeting with them specifically about critical infrastructure and how can we map out the interdependencies. So I told them, I just want to see a map, and I tell you that electric node goes out. What is it in this area? What do we have? Critical infrastructure. What does it knock out? What does it affect? And so we're working with Johns Hopkins and some other universities on looking at these same things, just to try to build platforms that can map these out and do that. On the National Guard side, so of course, the National Guard is not the lead. We are in support of the civilians. So if there is a response that needs to be determined, basically like triage who goes where, that is something that we would respond to. But one of the things we are doing to try to respond, and every state, territory, and the Washington, DC National Guard is doing this, is called an integrated support plan. So every single National Guard in a state will have their integrated support plan, where it basically lists out, I take every single capability that I have, from vehicles to people, I lay that out into a plan, and then we anticipate what might Maryland State Police need, or what may Maryland Department of Emergency Management need. How many people can we allocate to these places? That's in a case of we're not in a large-scale combat operation and everyone is here. Then further in the plan, we break it down. What if we're in a combat operations where half of my National Guardsmen are deployed right now? Yep. Now what do we do? And so we start breaking the plan down. And the reason why we're doing that, we want to provide that to the state, because sometimes states rely on their National Guard so heavily, and they think, well, you'll always be there. And well, I may be in Iran or somewhere else right now, so I have to give a plan to where I can show, hey, if something happens and this many people are deployed, because we have a idea, these are the units that will most likely be mobilized first. Now this is what I can offer. And we break it all the way down to where it's almost that all I have now is my Maryland Defense Force, which is an all volunteer, unit that comes in and volunteer. So that's something we're doing in all of the states, territories, and District of Columbia National Guards are doing that.
That is so helpful. This has been incredibly enlightening for me. A couple thoughts, and then I'll toss the question to you, where you get to toss to the crowd what you actually want them to do, because they should go and do stuff. So one thing that keeps coming through to me here is like this strategic communication and psychological preparation of the people involved, whether that is the decision makers who need to make sure that they understand the really intense choices they're going to have to make, very consequential choices of life and death potentially, and also preparing society for what that means and getting people ready in a way that doesn't scare them, but builds the urgency and understanding. And so that kind of keeps coming through to me. And so given that, lightning round, everybody gets 60 seconds because we have about 4 minutes left. What is one thing that this room of policymakers, feds, owners and operators, wonderful folks, should do differently when they leave today? Or what is the thing that they could do that you feel would be most supportive or consequential to your work?
Thanks, Mike. I'm actually going to riff off of what you said about strategic communications, because I think the key piece that we found in New York is the relationships and trust between state and local entities and entities across sectors as well. One of the challenges and opportunities is that New York is a home rule state. So locals don't necessarily have to align with what the state says unless it is in law. And so one of the opportunities for us is to establish positive relationships with them. We have to go out and convince them that, hey, we've got free shared services that you can take advantage of. We have a cyber incident response response team that you should call. All of that requires a lot of trust building. And we have a fantastic team at our Division of Homeland Security that has gone out and talked to every single county IT director and most every city IT director as well, to build those relationships, share information that they might not otherwise have, and make sure that when there is an incident in the future, that they know exactly who to call and what resources they can take advantage of.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian approach on this, which is no federal entity. I'm taking on this question of 2027. No federal entity has told the state of Texas, get ready. And it'd be helpful if the federal government really believes that we should be ready to get that message out. And I say that knowing a little bit about the origins of 2027. And I think it started with Admiral Davidson. There's the so-called Davidson window, where he made the first reference in 2021 about the threat is manifested during this decade. In fact, in the next 6 years, so 2021 plus 6 equals 2027. And then Bill Burns, CIA director at the time in 2023, said that Xi Jinping had instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready for a Taiwan invasion by 2027. I didn't mention it. My career included a year and a half as a special assistant to the U.S. ambassador to China from 1999 to 2001. Jiang Zemin actually told the PLA, get ready for a Taiwan invasion. I can't remember the exact year, by 2005 or 2009. It never materialized. And so this question of, I think there's a twofold message here. One, if there really is a threat, first, federal funding and support needs to be stabilized. And then secondly, if there really is a threat, the states need to know about it. And in some, I'm not saying that has to be the super, gamma subcompartment type reporting from NSA, but some message to the states that say, okay, we really have to address this problem. I think that's the thing that you all can do here.
For me, on the first side, on the federal side, if I would ask that some authorities are changed when it relates to cyber and how the military can assist states and local governments based on cyber. For me to only be able to assist in a state active duty status really limits us, especially if that company is feeding a Department of War facility. We should be able to do it in any status because it's benefiting the Department of War. So that would be my first thing, is to some authorities that are in place right now just needs to be rewritten. The language needs to be changed that would free up especially the National Guard to more quickly support some state and local events. And then also I would encourage you for your state legislature to put more laws in place requiring the reporting or requiring the inspections to be done. And then also, and many states have this, but many states don't, is a dedicated budget for National Guard to come in and support. Some states do not have a dedicated budget. Every time the National Guard goes onto a state active duty to go support, they pull the money from somewhere else and give it to the Guard to support. But the National Guard has so many capabilities that can really bring to bear, but if there's a dedicated budget, we know how to plan on what we need to prepare for and what we can assist with.
Mine might be a little broader just because I'm not representing a government entity, but it does seem like we all tend to think of cybersecurity, resilience, infrastructure preparedness as a modernization problem, right? An infrastructure modernization problem. And it is. But I would encourage everyone here to go home and work with whichever teams and partners you work with to treat it as equal parts modernization, messaging, and workforce. It is, in my opinion, equal parts, all of those. And we heard from so many who are working so hard today on the messaging component in order to get the resources and or policy or regulations changed in order to get the broad-based support from communities that we all serve. And part of that comes from also treating it equally as a workforce problem in order to execute once you're there. So that would be my one thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and please thank me in thanking the panel.
Help you thank the panel. Thank you.
It's been a long day. Thank you.